Sometimes expanded them to go up to 40 minutes.
Very well. So they use that term.
All of those things in education, of course, those things are important.
Oxygen is going to our heads and our lungs.
The affirmations in the mirror for about 2 minutes.
They make all sorts of mistakes. Without that,
this is amazing.
and doing new things for our brain.
Normal, in a sense, with all of the changes.
Which parts of the brain are used?
Them get out of their own way and understanding automatic patterns and
based on that map that we have.
There's neural connections that, mindfulness is a part of life.
Hi, Frog, how do you do? Yes, I'd like.
So if they are, just keep it aside. Your work, keep it.
It's good emotions.
How to use their observations to inform assessments.
Regulation in their nervous system.
See you with your smiling.
That's all. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you. Namaste to you, my friends.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Early Childhood Global Spotlight Show on Autism. I am Maryann Harman, your host today, and with me is Tere Bowen Irish. Tere, give a wave, say hi, and then I'm going to tell them all about your wonderful accomplishments and who you are.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be here. This should be a really interesting group. I'm ready for you.
Oh, good. And we are ready for you as well. I was very excited that Tere agreed to do the show. She's been practicing occupational therapy for over 40 years in pediatrics and psychiatry. She focuses on providing assessment, treatment, and collaborative services in public and private school systems. Through her business, All the Possibilities, Inc., and you can find a Facebook page, All the Possibilities. She offers workshops for therapists, parents, educators with the focus on the service industry, classroom management, mindfulness, wellness, and prevention for all school-age children. She's also the creator and author of the Drive-Through Menu Suite of Exercises. Is that with fries or without? No, sorry.
It's a number one and number two.
It's an initiative to bring movement into today's classrooms, which we know is so important. She's a certified yoga kids teacher and incorporates creative movement and yoga into her practice. Recently, she's become a certified mindful schools instructor. And she's the author of Yoga and Me, Come Be a Tree, and my favorite, Tere, we co-authored together My Mindful Music, which is a series of songs to help children energize and relax. Her latest publication is the Sensory Processing Support Planning Guide, and it's available through TheraPro. You can visit her website, allthepossibilities.com. So, Tere, how should we begin? What are the early signs of autism? Is that where you would like to start? How do we know?
Sure. As we've gotten to be more aware of this diagnosis and its frequency, I am thrilled that people are beginning to talk about what are those early signs. From an occupational therapy point of view, we want to look at that early attachment side of bonding with a parent. And if you notice a child might have a lot of fussiness and irritability and the typical kinds of intuitive things we think will calm them, such as holding them tight or rocking them, might not do that. The lack of eye contact, possibly. And then as they progress, what's going on with language? Are they imitating you? Are they distracted by more visual things away from a human face versus a human face? So those might be a few things that show a little flag.
And how early do these warnings start to show up?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know statistically what they're finding now, but I have been reading. And if you join my website, which is All the Possibilities When You Wish Upon a Child, my Facebook page, I put up cutting edge research from Science Daily there. And they're talking now about being able to have a pediatrician have a screening with a myriad of questions, looking at the child's sensitivity to touch, avoidance of certain food textures, sensitivity to smells or odors, issues with being able to maintain an eye gaze. Many of these kids don't play with toys traditionally either in the way you would expect them to at that age. They may get very involved with one item, playing with it over and over and over again, and not being able to be flexible in their play as well as their thinking.
Yeah, I know when one of my really good friends, her second child was showing signs. She would come to the music with Mare classes, and he was not like her first child with paying attention. And she was fantastic with him, but he always zeroed in whenever I would take out the dinosaur puppet. And the funny thing is, when I would go to their house so my daughter could play with the older sibling, he would not let me in the door. He would hand me the dinosaur puppet and say dinosaur. And until I sang that song with him, I couldn't come in the house.
Oh, that was his connection with you. And I think that's the thing that we have to be aware of. These folks with this diagnosis do want to connect. And even though the diagnosis is an umbrella of a spectrum, each person is very individualized, and what floats their boat to get their attention and their focus will get their attention if it's something that appeals to them.
Yes. So, are there levels of autism?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we cover those?
Okay. Well, it used to be that there was a high functioning autism called Asperger syndrome, which is no longer part of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Diagnosis. It's away now. Everybody's under the spectrum of autism. So it's a continuum. So severely impaired folks with this diagnosis have a really hard time just accessing life in general and are very, very dependent. And then like anything, there's a standard deviation, and then the other end may be very high functioning folks. What's really interesting about this particular diagnosis is I always tell the story. When I was a young therapist, I had to do an internship at a local Easter Seals, which had kids with disabilities. And so I was there for a month, and the supervisor brought me into a room one day, and she said, "You must see this child." And this little girl was twirling, and she was stimming with her fingers and watching her fingers. And they had her on a scooter board trying to get her to do some just movement patterns that might help with her development. And I said, "What's her diagnosis?" And the supervisor said to me, now this was 1977. She said, "She has autism. You may never see another person in your career with autism."
That's
how rare it was. So So now that we know it's not rare for whatever reason, whether it be environmental or we haven't ever noticed or what's going on, nobody knows. But I think there's a lot of current updated research. So we can't get in a groove of thinking this is just the way it is.
Right.
We must roll with it and try to figure out ways of connecting with these folks.
Now, if I can interrupt you for just 1 second.
Please do.
You used a term back there, and I'm not sure if everybody knew what you meant. You said she was stimming.
Yes.
So in case people don't know what that means, can you explain?
Sure. So stimming is usually some kind of a movement pattern that the child or the adult enjoys doing, and they do it almost they do it in order to it's part of their repertoire. Now, some people believe that it is their stress relief, and some people view it as a pleasure kinds of thing for them. What is our typical person regime? For many years we wanted to stop that. And now the thought process is maybe that's telling us that this is something that is pleasurable to this person and helps them reorient. They may be telling us they're on overload. Now there's something called a stereopathy, which you might see with working with some of these folks. So they have this individual, almost neurological movement pattern that is very often very subtle. I had a child many years ago that whenever he did something in a written format in the classroom, he always did this little shrug afterwards. And at first you think it's a tick, but then it's just this little kind of movement that helps him, his neurological system almost reset, if that makes sense. So, you know, the stimming part can be for a variety of reasons. Could be trying to avoid what's going on in the moment. It could be pleasurable. It could be something that is habitual.
So it come from stimulating?
They're stimulating, yep.
Okay. That's interesting. You always notice that with, for so many years, as we were talking before the show started, there were people that probably were on the spectrum, but we didn't know to call it that. And our parents would always tell, oh, he's just quirky.
Yeah. Yeah, the quirky child, right? There's a book written called The Quirky Child. And there's a lot of people that have sensory sensitivities. And that's the other thing that's on a spectrum. You know, you talk about sensory integration, but that it almost sounds like that's a diagnostic term. To me, sensory processing is part of what our nervous system does. So what soothes me personally might not soothe the 5-year-old that I work with in the classroom who happens to have a diagnosis of autism. And so we have to look at everyone's sensory needs, and they're dynamic. So the way you woke up this morning, what did you do in order to get yourself going this morning? Did a shower help, or are you a person that prefers a bath? You know, do you like a soft toothbrush, or do you like a vibrating one? These are all little sensory techniques that we use ourselves in our normal life, our typical life, to get us up to a level of alertness. A person with autism may need variations in how they bring in sensory, and they may choose to avoid some sensory situations, or they may sensory seek, so they're all over the place. So their nervous system is up and down and all around, which makes it really hard to get them settled enough to access being with them and teaching.
Now, I know this is one of the things that you're really passionate about. So when you know a child has autism and you can see these different sensory issues, what can we do to be aware of them and help make them more comfortable? That sensory issues some people think is just touch, but it could be the temperature in the house. It could be the loudness of the TV. It could be the clothing they're wearing and how the material feels against their body. It could be the texture of the food. So there are so many things that I think the average person doesn't realize just really gets to an autistic child. So if you can like lay out, like, these are the different sensories issues, and this is what we can do to be aware and make life more comfortable.
Right. Well, there's a lot of checklists out there. You know, Building Foundations for Sensory Integration has some checklists. There's also the school, I don't know, the sensory processing measure, which is part of school. I know it as the SPM, but I didn't know what the SPM meant. And so when you start to look at a person's neurological needs, we do look in the area. Touch and tactile are often the first place we go, like you mentioned. So when you look at somebody that likes to cuddle, somebody that invades your space, they're all over you, hugging, touching. And then you also look at somebody who doesn't want to be anywhere near you, and their personal space is almost 2 or 3 arm lengths away. That's the nervous system talking about not being able to process the sensory input. So you could have 2 extremes. You could have somebody that, like I said, is all over you, and another person who doesn't want to have anything to do with you from a sensory point of view.
And that must be hard. I'm sorry, but that must be hard on parents that have a child and not to take it personally. You always hear so many parents saying, I just want to hug my child, but maybe the best way to hug them is not to hug them. So for one moment, Preeti has said, Tere, we've observed that some children like to move both their fists and tap their feet. And thank you for sharing that. That's why they like to do it, that they're appreciative that now they understand that. So all these little things you're saying, so important.
Oh, thank you. Well, good. So when you think about the touch part, how does that extrapolate? You're absolutely right. From the first time you're snuggling your baby, if you start to notice the arching of the back, or they do better if they're swaddled nice and tight, and they accept the touch better that way, that means their skin is getting the input that it needs in order to tolerate the touch. So deeper pressure versus a light touch. And I always kind of giggle because when you extrapolate that to school, sometimes you'll see a teacher not realizing that they've actually set a kid off as they walk by, and they just, you know, tousle their hair. But that light touch can make them go into complete startle and feel unsafe. So when you think about sensory processing, your nervous system, no matter where you are, even right now in a familiar room, my nervous system is telling me, do you feel safe? Are you comfortable? Are you able to sit long and strong, right? If I felt like I have a squirrel that comes up to my bird feeder, so when I see him there, I actually will startle, and then I know that's my nervous system talking, right, to me. And so what we have to begin to think about is sensory is dynamic. I always tell the story. Think about yourself when you hear a kid whine. If you have had a good night's sleep, if you have no other stresses going on in your life, you can tolerate that whining and be productive in helping that child use their words and change their tone. But if you've had a long day of 8 hours of work and you've gone to the grocery store, you've done all these other things, and you come home and the child's going, you just want to leave the room, right? Because it feels like somebody is, you know, got a screwdriver in your ear. Your sensory system is saying, I'm on overload. I can't handle this right now. And so our children will do this. So think of the teacher. Okay, let's move from touch to auditory. The teacher that talks a lot because they want to make sure the child understands. Have you ever had that feeling when someone's trying to explain something to you and all of a sudden you can't hear the words any longer? You just hear the wow, 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 wow.
You're done.
Yeah. And that's very similar. So what do we do in this case? One, we give visual information. So dependent upon their ability, their age, or cognitive functioning, you would have picture charts of sequences. So if you're looking to toilet train a child, the first thing you would show maybe is the toilet. And then you would show pulling down pants. But You use single step commands. You don't go into, now you got to take your pants down and then you got to put the toilet seat up, and you don't go into that. You just keep showing pictures. So that visual piece disconnects from the auditory, and then you increase function.
Very, very interesting point. Let's just take a moment to say hi to those that have joined us and thank them for coming on. Hi, Debbie and Preeti and Siddharth and Kalki and Wow Kids Smiley Home. And some people are just showing up as Facebook user. So
Great.
thank you. So we're glad to have them here.
Good. I'm glad you're here too. So when we start to think about, as a child goes from those early stages of showing sensory issues, it can stay with them, but look a little different as they show up for school age. And you can actually habituate with time and get used to the sensory information coming in. A perfect example would be a fire alarm, okay? So the auditory input of the fire alarm, we all have children that when a fire alarm goes off, they actually go into complete freeze. Their hands might go up like this. So how do we deal with that? We don't say, oh, there's nothing wrong, just move along. Because for them, their hearing might actually be at a higher decibel ability than ours. And it does feel like someone has a horn in their ear, right? And so when we begin to talk to them about what you do when you hear that, you're to stand up. And then you give them someone to stand behind in line, or you get a buddy for them. So you're not dissing the idea that they have sensory tenderness or sensitivity, but you're helping them cope with it to get through. And with practice, with time, you may see that a child just needs some headphones the moment the alarm goes off. If it's in the desk, they put the headphones on, and then they're very capable.
That's a good point, which leads to, I don't know if you can see this question that is on the screen. And do you want to address, does music help them focus? As we experience, the only time sometimes you get their attention is if they hear their favorite song or a rhyme. So you and I know, well, you know how I feel about that, but go ahead.
Well, I think, again, it's very individualized. As you know, I'm very movement oriented. So I do these things called army crawls where the kids get on their bellies and they're moving along like this, right? So I sing, you're in the army now, you're in the army now, watch you crawl right up the wall, you're in the army now. So I had 2 sessions with this young man. He was 6 years old and he was on the autism spectrum. And I said, do you want to do some army crawls? And he goes, yes, but could you not sing, please?
And that's when you asked me to write the mindful music songs.
That's right. So what was so interesting to me was he loved the movement part, but for him, that didn't work. Now I have another kid that right now who I have a big bag of alphabet letters. And if I showed that to him, who cares? But when I say, I'm digging for a letter, I'm digging for a letter, I'm digging for a letter, what will it be? He is like on the screen looking, what letter did you get? You know, and he wants to see. So I do think that, yes, you're absolutely right. Singing can often make that connection, because what is it? It's rhythm, it's repetitive, you can't frown when you're singing. There's this happy kind of connection there that music can really do wonders. But there's a caveat. Music can actually be abhorrent to some people. So I go into middle schools and high schools, and I'll say, what's your typical day? And they'll say, well, I can't stand when we do independent work in math because he puts on this funky music and I can't focus.
Right.
And so right. I think we have to understand what the individual needs are and respect them. But you are the expert in music, so why don't you answer some of this too?
What I'd like to add is that, and correct me if you think I'm saying something maybe a little bit off, but music is activating all parts of the brain. And in an autistic child, in a regular, so-called regular person, when we get stressed, we go to that one area of the brain that is dominant. And sometimes for autistic children, it is that part of the brain for fight or flight.
Right.
So when you use music, you're activating all the other parts of the brain. And so it gets the attention away from that one area they're dominant in and tries to get the brain to work more holistically. And music also sometimes, because the words have been heard so many times, like, you're okay, it's okay, we're all okay, calm down. That's their cue. Like, all right, I've heard that before, and after we sang it, I felt better. So it's kind of a comfort thing too, like almost like a comfort food, but it's comfort music. And it also is sometimes giving them not just calming words, but directional words, or like in the Boom Boom Beat song that we did, like children hear that song and all of a sudden their bodies start going boom, boom, beat, boom, boom, beat, and the whole brain starts paying attention. But as you said, the caveat is that some autistic children, the sound is too much. And in music classes, what we found is those old headphones. That's where they come in handy. During music class, some autistic children have wanted to stay with me, but have told me you're too loud. And so we put the headphones on them, and then they're happy because they get to dance and move with their friends, but they're not getting so much sensory audio input. So,
and I think you're absolutely right. So what we have to do as the adult caregivers is to recognize and respect instead of minimize. Like, oh, it's not a big deal. Get over it. You don't need headphones. You don't need earplugs, whatever. Same with personal space. Like I always say to kids, it's nothing wrong with saying, I need my space, and make that an arm length away or a hula hoop length away. So you begin, like you were saying with the words in the music, I often teach scripts to kids. So like you said, they walk in, they see a sub teacher who their teacher's out for the day. They say to themselves, hey, it's a zigger zagger day. It's going to be okay. And so when they have those scripts, like our song, then that gives them that comfort because it overrides that fight flight feeling. So think of Dr. Siegel. How many of you have read his stuff? I love his stuff. And he does the hand model of the brain where he says, you have your amygdala and your emotional part, reptilian part of the brain here, and your prefrontal cortex is here. So if you feel unsafe in any way, and today we're talking about the child with autism who might feel sensory feelings of arousal that seem exaggerated, if they don't have any way of coping with that over arousal, they literally flip their lid. And so that's
a good picture. That's awesome.
Oh, you got to go see Dan Siegel on YouTube video for this, because I teach kids as young as 5 about flipping their lid and to use their language prior to when they feel it's going to happen. And think of mindfulness and body awareness activities. If we started feeling unsafe, where do you feel it? Usually it's my belly. Other people, it's their chest or their ears and face get tight. If you can help kids as young as 5, even with the diagnosis like this, to say, something doesn't feel right in my body. And I've had kids come up to me and go, it's wiggling. I'm going to flip my lid. And so that's a good technique to help kids become more aware of when the sensory piece is too much.
So then this is where it becomes challenging for autism children to be in inclusive classrooms. And I know that many teachers that I've worked with that have come to the workshops have purchased the My Mindful Music, and they use them every day, or they use Dr. Becky Bailey's I Love You rituals, and they teach them to all the children as a way of them having a coping tool to begin the day with brain gym, Carla Hannaford's work, and get them all together. I think, does this also make the children that are on the spectrum feel like everybody needs this? It's not being done just because there's something different about me. Everybody needs this. So let's talk about inclusiveness. And because there's so many parents that are afraid of either having their child ostracized, kept home, or, okay, let's just throw them out there and see how they do.
Well, I think we've come a long way in the United States, and I think we have to begin to look at what we have to do the best with what we have. First of all, to integrate in an inclusive setting a child with this diagnosis, you first have to look at that child again for what are their levels of arousal. How could their reactions to input affect them being able to follow, quote, the routine of the classroom? Do they have their daily living skills met? Are they potty trained? Are they able to open their snack packet and eat independently? I mean, it really takes a team, a village of people to understand I always say, what are the entrance expectations for a typical kid in this classroom? So if you got a kindergartner or if you got a sixth grader, what would you want the typical kid to have? Then you parallel that with what skill sets does this child with this diagnosis have coming into the classroom? To me, you're talking about getting the body and mind ready. That's why I believe in movement. I did my drive-through menus years ago, because if they can drive through and find movement in the way they are, they're set up like a menu for Burger King or McDonald's. I'll take a number 1 or I'll take a number 2. The movement has sensory focus. So they're jumping up and down, or they're doing slow motion movements, and that helps integrate. So to get back to that, if the classroom has that differentiated feeling that all are welcome, that's the other thing. We must recognize that we cannot put a child in a classroom and expect him to fit in without us differentiating how we offer the activities. The other thing about the movement, to me, and what has to happen to make the day flow for that child, would be we need to do moments of intervention before they flip their lid. Yeah. So in other words, we're looking at it as prevention, right? So I get up in the morning and I stretch every morning. That's part of getting my system awake, right? So if a child is welcome, we don't know what happened on the way to school. Maybe there was a backfire of a car, right? You hear the boom, or the kid sitting next to him in the car, or the bus was banging against him. So he can walk into your classroom and be overwhelmed already from a sensory mode. But music, movement, and mindfulness, all 3 ingested in small bits, can help clean that slate to start the day. And then about every hour, the Kinesthetic Classroom book by Zengel and Kuzala, they say every 20 minutes without movement causes your neurons not to wire and fire as rapidly.
Yes, and Carla Hannaford teaches that the system shuts down in adults after 22 minutes.
Yeah.
So you need to move, but for children, it's even more. Like for a 4-year-old, you have to move once every 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And, so for autistic
But it doesn't mean you're shutting your classroom down, though.
No.
You're just making sure.
Going like this and moving.
Or moving to the sand table, walking like crabs, or, jumping like bunnies.
This is why when we are driving and we get tired, we rub our noses, because we're activating and stimulating this part of our brain that connects to the inner ear. and helps us stay awake and focus. So for autistic children, am I correct that they need that more often or less often, or it depends on the autistic child?
Well, I'd say it's more often than not. The intervention, the modality that is chosen when they talk about sensory diets, these are very common if you have a child with autism in a classroom. So the sensory diet means not what you eat, but it's what the sensory need is. So if you have a child jumping up and down, what's our first thought as a teacher or educator? Sit down. No,
not mom.
Right.
That's not my first thought.
Right, I know. But many in classrooms, it's disruptive with 20 other kids and you got one, boom, 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 right? So what you have to do is think, okay, how do I feed that system? So like I'm coaching a educational assistant right now. This kid's crawling on the floor. So when she leaves him, says, okay, we're going to go take a break, she takes him outside, puts him on a scooter board and let him crawl all over in the scooter board. So she's feeding the system.
Yes.
So then 2 or 3 minutes of that, she's counting because he particularly loves numbers. So they count and then they speed up, they slow down. So she's giving the system what it needs. And then she says, now your body's ready to come sit long and strong back in class. So when you think about feeding the sensory needs, so if you have a kid that, let's say he's chewing. Okay, okay, we got those. That's oral motor. And Gazelle, through development, said that right around 6, 7, 8 years old, kids will start chewing things because of beginning of anxiety. It's almost increased self-awareness of what needs to get done. But also in autism or in sensory processing issues, you see this oral motor need. Giving them 2 or 3 sticks of gum can actually help because it gives them that gnawing feeling that they need in order to focus and concentrate. When we're driving, to get back to that, thinking about sucking on something, a straw with something thick liquid in it, like a milkshake, that helps you keep alert.
Yeah.
And when you actually write your name, your tongue stays right on the roof of your mouth. So you're stabilizing joints in order to focus. So something oral motor is feeding the system, telling parents to give them, instead of soft sucking applesauce from a tube, give them something crunchy to chew, a real apple or popcorn, something that gives that mastication to help them keep alert and stable.
Wow, we're like at 35 minutes already.
That's unbelievable.
So much fun. Backing up for 1 second about, paying attention to the individual child and what their actions are is so important. And when I was teaching middle school, I had a mom come to see me. And I said, what is it that you're concerned about? She said, my son has gotten written up in every single class but yours. And he's getting written up for walking around the room. I want to know why he doesn't walk around the room in music. You know what my answer was, Tere. He does.
And that's perfectly fine. Yes.
Why haven't you complained to me about it? I said, because he needs to get up and move. He gets up, he looks out the window, he throws something in the garbage that didn't necessarily need to go in the garbage, but he needed an excuse to move. If he was walking around and hitting kids in the back of the head, I have an issue. But he's satisfying his need to move. And this brings us to one of our last questions is, and I think is one of the things that the parents really are hungry for. Because I think parents kind of feel like, well, if I send them to school, I have an expert like Tere. I have a music teacher like Mare, and they know what to do with them. But what do I do at home? How do I extend this at home? So what are some of the top 3 things a parent could do at home with their child? Like they've identified their child as autistic based on the things that you've talked about at the very beginning of this. Now they are at home. How do they make family life smoother? And I know that, there are things maybe, we could go on and on because Weighted blankets could help them stay in bed. If a 3 or 4-year-old is having a problem with sheets, a weighted blanket might help them fall asleep with some quiet music, But what are things like parents have to consider? Food, lighting, the sound, some parents overclutter, too much stimulation, try to give them worksheets. So what do we do? And keep in mind, we're mostly talking about kids up until the age of 8.
Okay. So one thing that's really important, and it's very much a juggling job, is you've got this person who likes sameness often because it's predictable, right? That keeps the lid on. So routine and ritual is very important. So in other words, when that person gets home, when I coach parents or treat kids, I often will say, have a board where you're writing down what's going to occur for the evening, because that allows that person to get a preview and review of what's ahead without getting anxious about it. And so it also helps feed natural habituation, which is developmentally appropriate. So if it means that they get home at 3, they have a snack and they can play a video game for 10 minutes, and that's that, then they have to go outside and play or whatever the choice is. I often say to parents, it's kind of fun to have a box on top of the refrigerator or in a cupboard with unusual little things. Like one of my parents had an old stamp collection of theirs. It wasn't worth anything, but that was something really cool that they spent a half hour together connecting for a while. And then the next month she had brought some coins because the child really kind of liked all that collecting part. So you're exposing the kids. Now, we all need some chill time too. So a child needs to figure out, just like a typical child, how can they play by themselves? And what can you encourage with that playing by themselves? So you give little increments of this. Now, when I talked about juggling earlier, this is the hard part. So you want to introduce a little novelty because you want them to be flexible in their approach. So what if you got a phone call half hour into the child being home, it's 3:30, and the car is broken down of your spouse, and you've got to get in the car and go. You don't want the child to dig in and go, but I'm supposed to be doing this now.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to begin to think about how to create a flow, how to tell them what's a negotiable item and what's a non-negotiable item. So I have some parents that call it a flip-flop day. We already talked about zigger zagger day. I have one parent that does very well using the word, oh, there's a bump in the road today. Mommy's got a dentist appointment, or we've got to go to the grocery store. And with patience and understanding and communication, you'll see the flexibility of thinking occurring. And if you can talk as if you're the one, so one of the things activities I really love is from How Does Your Engine Run? It's called the Alert Program. And you teach a child, sometimes my body is like a car. It runs high, it runs low, or it runs just right. And so if I get home and my body's running high because I've been in school all day, what kinds of things? So creating menus, you can go outside and play. You can bounce the ball. You can play with the Nerf ball inside. You can do all these things. They pick what will help their body get to just right.
Okay, so let me just, most of what you're saying is great for a 4 to 8-year-old.
Yep.
What about those 2 to 5-year-olds that like they're not, maybe some of them aren't verbal.
Absolutely. So what you have to do there is create that menu in your mind, right? So if you think, okay, I'm going to greet them, I'm going to give them a snack, and I'm going to allow them to have to work for their snack. So I give them a little plastic knife and some peanut butter and some celery and, let them work a little for their snack. We want them to start building those skills. Then when the snack's over, in your mind's eye, you have to start to make dinner maybe. So what could you put at a little table nearby so they're actually playing by themselves parallel to you making dinner? Or what half hour can you spend doing something together, reading a book, tumbling on the floor, making a fort out of pillows? I mean, if you segment the time, they'll get used to the routine of what's expected for dinner and what's expected for bed, bath, and book. And by the way, that bed, bath, and book routine, whether they're 2 or whether they're 8, actually helps get the body to a level of naturally releasing melatonin. The core of the body temperature changes, which gets somebody ready for sleep. And you were mentioning about the weighted blanket. Be very careful, though. You want the weighted blanket, and if you Google how much weight for what age and what's the child's weight, that's what you need to look for. Just don't throw any weighted blanket on them. The other thing is a body sock. Body sock is made of spandex, and you can see them at TheraPro, but you can buy spandex and make your own. And that actually, the child gets in it and they can push against it and roll in it, and it actually makes them feel very comfortable because they're contained. I prescribe sometimes kids sleeping in a sleeping bag in their bed because that allows them to get in and snuggle. And think of your own sensory system. Some of us don't like a lot of covers and others just bring it on, right? And so we have to find out what works for them. But the sensory doesn't stop at school. It comes as you go through your day in the evening hours and trying to set that routine.
Okay, so in closing,
I can't believe it's over already.
I mean, there's so many more things I'd love to talk about. And if anyone has any questions, please send them to us. I know we're jumping, we're trying to hit some points. There may be some things you wish we elaborated on a little bit more. One of the points, or the point that I think would be good to end on, is that this autism is not a diagnosis like measles. It's not something your child is going to get over. It is something that is going to modify and change your life forever. And I think that is hard for adults to accept. And what are some strategies and also some hopefulness about living with an autistic child? And I think that there's quite a few shows on TV now that, like the show on Netflix called Atypical. I don't know if you've seen it, but it is so good with understanding how an autistic child lives on a daily basis. And even young Sheldon, because we all know he's on the spectrum. But, and that parents are okay. You're okay. Your child's okay. Things are just going to have to be done differently. And if you can kind of like just give everybody a verbal hug right now, Tere, about.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have to recognize when you hear the diagnosis, you have a flag that pops up, right? And so acceptance comes with time, but allow yourself the grief, allow yourself the what ifs, because all of us know that have been parents, and those that have witnessed our friends be parents know that you can plan forever and it doesn't happen the way you want it to happen. But this is where you can't get stuck, is being in the grief part and the fix it mode always. It's an acceptance sort of like of the present. What is here now? What are the things we can work on now that will enhance rather than fix? And where is there acceptance in the exceptionalness of this person? So I go back to Gardner's multiple intelligences. I think he was ahead of his time, and I think we've dropped it, and I keep picking it up because when you think of the different levels of intelligence and the savant-like parts of a person who has autism. I have a person that does numbers now, and he loves them. But I said to his mom, we just can't allow him to just do numbers. We have to make the numbers realistic in life. So can you count how many forks we need for dinner? Can you set the table and put the number of forks and knives and spoons out? So think about areas where he's mathematically intelligent, but how can we bring it into the world we live in and make it a safe place? But don't make it so safe that they don't struggle. They have to struggle in order to learn. And that's a worrisome for any kids with special needs. We want them to have natural consequences. We want them to be able to struggle, and they have to learn how to fail and to celebrate success. And it'll be a learning experience for you both. And don't do it alone. You're no island. There's so many people with this diagnosis now, and so many wonderful informational sessions like this and books that can educate you and help you.
Well, thank you, Tere. That's really a boatload of information here. And
we did a lot in 45 minutes.
Thank you, Tere and Maryann. This was super. It'd be really helpful for a whole of our community. I hope so. You're very welcome. We would, you know, if you want to get in touch with Tere, Tere, why don't you tell them some of the things that you offer that they can get in touch with you to find out more?
Sure. Sure. So I, up until COVID, I was traveling all over. Now I do pretty much everything remotely from my home, but I offer schools information of how to create a classroom that's fluid throughout the day. I specify angry, anxious children, looking at kids like that, or focusing on how to integrate inclusion for special needs kids. I do individual work with kids and families to help them adjust. And I also enjoy so much being able to coach folks through what's going on in their classrooms or in their homes to help them become empowered to figure out some of these tough things. So I'm a busy gal, but I love what I do. I'm doing mindfulness online now, and I'm doing some yoga for youth as well. So
people can log on to your Facebook page and find out when you're offering a yoga class online or a mindfulness, and they can log on with their child and do these things together, which would be very helpful for the bonding, which is harder for autistic children, and also for the parent as well.
Well, we've also found, and this may be something that could be thought of, is we've had groups of parents stir the pot that want to gather, and educators. So if they want to get a group of 10 people or 5 people in families, then I can do something for them personally. So, but all the possibilities when you wish upon a child on Facebook. And from there, just text me on, message me, and I will give you my email and we can move from there.
All righty. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in. And Tere, thank you so much. You know I love working with you.
Oh, right back at you.
That My Mindful Music CD is...
I know. It was fun.
You had a few things you said today, which already has me thinking of some other songs. But everyone in the Early Childhood Global Mastermind Community Group, thank you for supporting these programs. Atul, you are the man. You put this all together, and thank you. And
thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So everybody have a good day, and thank you so much.